The rain came down hard on Route 9D at 9:47 on a Friday night in late October. Wyatt Harlan's headlights swept across a Mercedes sedan angled against the guardrail, hazard lights pulsing slow through the wet air. He pulled the old Ford onto the shoulder and climbed out. A woman sat behind the wheel, not moving. He tapped the glass. She turned. Blood ran down from her right temple into the collar of a white coat. Not much. Enough to scare her. He got the first aid kit from the truck, pressed gauze to her head, asked her name, the date, how many fingers. She answered each one without hesitation. No concussion. She kept glancing at a leather briefcase on the passenger seat. Her hand stayed on it like someone might reach in and take it. He checked the car. The front tire was low. The airbags hadn't deployed. He pumped the tire, tightened the valve, wiped his hands on a rag. She reached for her wallet. He shook his head. "Ma'am, you're bleeding. Keep your money and drive slow." She looked at him a long second. "What's your name?" "Wyatt." She didn't say hers. She only nodded. His taillights shrank into the rain. She stayed in the driver's seat, both arms wrapped around the briefcase, and whispered to no one in the empty passenger seat. "Dad, I'm getting close. Monday morning at Harp's Diner, across the county road from Millbrook Auto Works." Wyatt took the same booth he always took. Eggs, bacon, coffee black. Harlan Pickard, who everybody called Harp, topped off his cup and said something about the Yankees losing in extra innings and the bullpen being held together with duct tape and prayer. The door chimed. She walked in. Jeans now. Gray sweater. Hair pulled back. A small bandage above her right eyebrow. She came straight to his booth like she'd been rehearsing the walk across the parking lot. "I owe you a breakfast." And an explanation. He didn't tell her to leave. She sat down across from him. She said her name was Vanya. She said she worked in logistics in the city and was taking a few days up in the valley to clear her head. All of it was true. None of it was enough. He didn't push. She asked him what he did. Mechanic at Millbrook. 8 years now. Diesel and heavy equipment mostly. Farm tractors, timber haulers, the occasional excavator from the state road crews. She nodded and said her father had always told her you could tell a man's character by how he treated the mechanic who saw his car stripped to the block. Wyatt didn't know what to do with that sentence, so he just drank his coffee. She asked about his life. He gave her the short version. Widower. Daughter. 7 years old. House out on Willow Lane with a fence he'd built himself the spring after Emily died because he couldn't sit still. He didn't mention Cornell. Nobody asked. She laughed once when he told her June had drawn a fire hydrant last week and labeled it Red Man. He covered his coffee cup with his hand so she wouldn't see it shake. He hadn't laughed at anything he'd said out loud since the winter Emily stopped eating. They stayed there 40 minutes. She asked small questions and he gave small answers, and neither of them tried to fill the quiet that kept opening between sentences. Once she looked out the window at the wet parking lot and said she hadn't sat in a booth in a diner in almost 7 years. He didn't know how to answer that either, so he offered her the last piece of his bacon instead. She took it. Harp walked by and set the check on the table. He looked at Vanya too long, like a man pulling a face out of a memory that wouldn't quite sit still. He didn't say anything. He just moved on to the next booth. When she stood to leave, she pulled a 20 out of her wallet and left it under the salt shaker, even though he'd told her breakfast was on him. She walked out without looking back. Harp came over and sat down heavily in the booth across from Wyatt. He watched the Mercedes pull out of the gravel lot and turn north on Route 9D. "Where'd you meet her, Wyatt?" "She broke down Friday night in the rain." "Why?" Harp didn't answer. He stared through the window at the place the car had been. "Whit," he said, almost to himself. "Your girl is here. What did you say?" "Nothing." Harp got up. "Forget it." He walked back behind the counter. His hand shook as he lifted the next pot of coffee off the burner. Wyatt had worked across the street from that man for 8 years and had never once seen his hand shake. She came back to Beacon on Wednesday. She asked him to walk the river with her. He said yes before he thought about it. They walked the east bank of the Hudson for 2 hours, past the train platform, past the rusted foundations of a brick works that had closed before either of them was born. She carried the leather briefcase. He noticed. He didn't ask. She asked him about his wife. He hadn't said Emily's name out loud to anyone but June in almost a year. He told Vanya about the diagnosis, stage 3, about the 8 months of treatment. About the experimental protocol down at Sloan Kettering that cost $180,000 and that insurance wouldn't cover. About selling his father's 1970 Chevelle to a collector in Pennsylvania for $22,000. About how that wasn't enough. About how Emily died 2 days before a spot opened in the trial. Vanya walked beside him in silence for a long time. The river slid past below them, flat and gray under the afternoon sky. "My father died from the wrong medication too," she said finally. But not because he was poor. He looked at her. She didn't explain. She only set her hand on the briefcase again. They walked back toward the parking lot. Near the trailhead, she stopped and turned to him. "Did you go to school for this work?" "Almost. Cornell. Mechanical engineering. I left in the fall of my senior year." "Why?" Emily's mother was diagnosed the same month. Emily was working 2 jobs in Rochester to pay for treatment. Somebody had to drive down to Vermont on weekends and take care of the house. I never went back. "You were almost an engineer." "I am an engineer," he said. "Nobody calls me that." She looked at him for a long moment, as if she were filing the sentence somewhere she could come back to it. Then she smiled, small, and they walked on. That night she drove back to the rental house in Garrison. She locked the door, pulled the blinds, and opened the briefcase on the kitchen counter. Inside were pharmacy receipts from March of 2020, a copy of an internal review from Lenox Hill Hospital that she had bought from a private nurse who had retired and needed the money for her daughter's tuition, and a single handwritten note in her father's block script on the back of an envelope. "Vanya, if I go suddenly, look at Dalton's March medication logs. Harp has the original. Dad, March 2020. She had found the note in her father's personal safe in June, 6 years after his funeral, when she finally had the courage to go through the last drawer. It had taken her 4 months to put the pieces together. The night she had met Wyatt on Route 9D, she had not been running away from anything. She had been driving to Albany to meet a federal prosecutor with everything she had so far. A black Chevrolet Suburban had tailed her out of the Midtown garage. 2 exits past Cold Spring, she had seen it again in her mirror. She had panicked, jerked the wheel, clipped the guardrail, and bled onto the steering wheel for 3 minutes before a Ford pickup had pulled up behind her in the rain. Wyatt sent her a message at 10 past midnight. "Whatever you're carrying in that briefcase, I'm not asking. But if you need somewhere safer than a rental house in Garrison, I have a spare room and a deadbolt." She did not answer for 4 hours. At 3 in the morning, she wrote back, "I can't yet. Thank you." Thursday morning, Harp pulled him into the cramped office behind the service bay and shut the door. He turned the old television to CNBC and didn't speak. A woman's face filled the screen. The Chiron read, Celeste Vanya Orrick, 34, Chief Executive Officer, Orrick Industrial Holdings, $4.2 billion in assets under management. A pending $140 million acquisition of a dozen heavy equipment repair facilities up and down the Hudson Valley. The anchor used the phrase, "quiet heiress," and then shifted to a clip of her walking out of a midtown lobby with her head down and one hand on a leather briefcase. Wyatt stood very still. Harp turned the television off and sat down on the edge of the desk. He pulled a thick yellow envelope out of the safe behind him, set it on the desk between them, and put both hands flat on it like he was holding something alive. "Her father and I came back from Vietnam in '73. Same platoon, same flight home, same week in the VA ward. We stayed close every year after that until the day he died. 6 years ago, he sent me this and a handwritten letter that said if she ever starts asking about Dalton's March file, give it to her. I've been waiting ever since. I didn't know if she'd ever come. I didn't know if she'd ever know enough to ask. Then why give it to me instead of her? Because if she's here alone, and Dalton Krebs knows she's here, she's dead before she reaches Albany. You aren't on anybody's list. You walk it up her porch. You don't call her first. Who's Krebs? Chief Operating Officer of her father's company. Witt's number 2 for 20 years. Witt figured out he was stealing. Witt died of a stroke 3 weeks later. Witt didn't have strokes. Witt had a heart like a diesel. Wyatt picked up the envelope. It weighed more than it should have. He drove to Garrison that evening. The envelope sat on the passenger seat, and the whole ride up Route 9, he kept glancing at it like it might open on its own. He parked on the street, walked up the gravel path, and knocked. She opened the door. She saw what was in his hand. She read her father's handwriting on the front of the envelope where it said Vanya, and her knees gave out against the doorframe, and she slid halfway to the floor before he caught her under the elbow. 6 years of looking, and it walked up her porch in the hands of a mechanic she had met in the rain 6 nights ago. He didn't reach for her again. He helped her up, set the envelope on the kitchen table, filled a glass of water from the tap, and sat down across from her. "I don't know who you are," he said, "but Harp trusted your father, and I trust Harp. Start at the beginning. Tell me." She did. All of it. Whitaker Orrick, Dalton Krebs, March of 2020, the pharmacy receipts, the nurse from Lenox Hill, the black SUV she'd seen 3 times in the last 2 weeks, the name Vanya, which was her middle name and the only name at Orrick Industrial that nobody in the office would recognize. When she finished, he asked what she needed from him. "I need to open this envelope with you," she said, "and I need to not sleep alone tonight." At the far end of the street, a black Suburban pulled up against the curb and killed its headlights. Neither of them saw it yet. He drove her back to Beacon instead of Garrison. If someone was watching the rental, the lease was in her name. His house was not. She agreed before he finished the sentence. June was already asleep upstairs. He made up the couch with clean sheets and set out a spare toothbrush on the sink. They opened the envelope at the kitchen counter by the refrigerator light because they were both afraid of what would show through the window from the street. The envelope held 3 things: a handwritten medication log from Whitaker's private nurse in March of 2020, noting the 3 separate times Dalton Krebs had personally handled the pills when she had stepped out of the room. A phone transcript of a call Whitaker had made to Harp 2 days before he died, logged by the hospital as a medical consult call but recorded as standard practice, in which he said he believed Krebs had embezzled from the company through a $40 million kickback on a bogus insurance vendor, and that he was afraid of what the man might do when confronted, and a flash drive the size of a thumbnail. She plugged the drive into Wyatt's laptop. 1 file, 14 minutes of audio. Whitaker had secretly recorded a meeting with Krebs on the 2nd of March, 2020, in the study of the Orrick House in Greenwich. Krebs had threatened to make things quiet if Whitaker took the kickback scheme to the FBI. She heard her father's voice for the first time in 6 years. She didn't cry. She put her hand over her mouth and held it there. When the recording ended, she said, very quietly, "It's enough. It's enough to put him away." Wyatt made her a cup of chamomile tea. She drank half of it. He sat across from her at the counter, and neither of them spoke for a long time. June came down the stairs in the morning wearing pajamas with dinosaurs on them. She stopped at the bottom step. There was a blonde woman sitting at her kitchen table. June was 7. She had seen plenty of strange things. This was new. She walked over and studied the bandage above the woman's eyebrow. "Did you fall down?" "I did," Celeste said. "Your dad helped me." June nodded like that settled something important. Then she turned to Wyatt. "Daddy, is your friend staying for breakfast?" It was the first time in 6 years anyone had called her a friend instead of a title. Celeste looked at Wyatt across the table. Wyatt looked back. Neither of them answered June directly. Wyatt stood and pulled the pan off the hook above the stove. After breakfast, Celeste called James Okafor, the federal prosecutor at the Southern District of New York she had been driving to see the night of the rain. She told him she had the originals and a witness. He said Monday morning at 9, his office in Albany. She hung up. She did not know that Dalton Krebs had been running a mirror on her personal phone since August. Saturday morning, a black Lexus pulled into the gravel lot at Millbrook at 7:45, early enough that only Harp was in the shop. Dalton Krebs stepped out alone. No driver, no bodyguard. He was 56 and wore a hand-stitched coat from a tailor on Savile Row, and he walked like a man who had never once been afraid of a parking lot in his life. Harp was opening the bay doors. Krebs stopped short of the threshold, hands in his coat pockets, and studied the shop the way a man studies a building he has already decided to buy. "Mr. Pickard, I'm going to skip the introduction. I know what you have. Whitaker sent it to you in the spring of 2020. You've kept it for 6 years. That's loyalty, and I respect loyalty. Name a number. 2 million. 5. Cash, no paper trail, wired to any account in any country you name by Monday morning. In exchange, I forget that you and this shop and the Hudson Valley ever existed. Whit paid me in 47 years of friendship," Harp said. You don't have that in the bank, Dalton. You couldn't buy it if your whole company wrote me a check. Krebs nodded, as if he had expected that answer and had already planned past it. All right, we try it another way. He got back in the Lexus and drove south. At noon, he was on Wyatt's front porch in Beacon. Wyatt wouldn't let him through the screen door. They spoke on the steps in the thin November sunlight. Krebs offered a $350,000 consulting contract with Auric Industrial Holdings in exchange for 2 weeks in Florida with June and no contact of any kind with Celeste Auric for the duration. The terms were printed on Auric letterhead in a crisp manila envelope. Wyatt tore the envelope in half without reading past the second line, handed both halves back, and held the screen door open for him to leave. Krebs didn't flinch. He took the halves. He glanced past Wyatt into the yard where June was pushing a plastic dump truck through the crabgrass. Pretty kid. Lost her mother 4 years ago, didn't she? Be a shame if she lost her father, too. Route 9D is a dangerous road in the rain, Mr. Harland. Roads get dangerous other ways, too. People slip in their kitchens. Carbon monoxide is quiet. Wyatt closed the door. He stood with his hand on the knob for a full minute. It wasn't fear for himself. He could feel his own pulse in his wrist, and it was steady. It was fear for the child in the yard, and it was a fear he recognized because it was the same thing that had put him on his knees in a hospital hallway 4 years ago. He took his phone out of his front pocket, stopped the voice memo that had been running since he had heard tires on the gravel, and saved it under the date. He called Celeste. He came to my house. He named my daughter. He said Route 9D. Celeste was quiet for 10 full seconds on the line. Get June out, not Florida. Go to Harp's cabin off the county road. I'll be there inside an hour. By 3 that afternoon, all 3 of them were at Harp's cabin in the woods north of Beacon. Elaine Pickard took June into the kitchen to roll out biscuits with a rolling pin that had been her mother's. June was allowed to use the star-shaped cookie cutter. Harp opened the gun safe in the back room and laid a pump shotgun on the hallway table where it could be seen from the front door. Not hidden, not drawn, just present. I've known that man close to 30 years, Harp said. He was a coward at 28 in a suit that didn't fit him. Cowards don't go away. They just get richer and buy other people to do what they can't bring themselves to. Celeste called James Okafor and moved the meeting from Monday morning to Sunday morning. He didn't ask why. He said 8 a.m., his office, side door. She called her personal attorney in Manhattan next and told him to begin drafting the civil complaint tonight. Fraud, criminal negligent homicide, obstruction of justice, witness intimidation. He said he would have a draft on her laptop by dawn. Wyatt sat on the porch with a mug of coffee he couldn't drink. 5 hours to go before they would need to be on the road. The forest was still the way November forests are still. Every leaf down, every small sound carrying twice the distance it should have. Somewhere up the county road, a dog barked once and stopped. At 2 in the morning, Celeste came out onto the porch wrapped in one of Elaine's quilts and sat in the chair next to him. Neither of them had slept. The quilt had a stitched border of small red stars. She pulled it up to her chin. If tomorrow goes wrong, she said, you don't owe me anything. You take June and you drive. You don't look back. I have lawyers for the rest. I have enough put away that June can go to any college she wants, if it comes to that. It's already set up. My estate attorney has the file. You talk like somebody who's already been left. She didn't answer for a while. The porch boards creaked under his chair. Across the yard, a deer moved through the edge of the tree line and was gone. I was 28 when my father died, she finally said. The morning of the funeral, my mother told me she was leaving for France with a painter she'd been seeing for a year. She didn't come back. So yes, I talk like someone who's already been left. Because I have been, twice, and I've been running a $4 billion company since the week after it happened, and I've been making every decision since then as if the answer is always, I'll do it alone. He didn't say anything. He set his hand flat on the porch rail between them, palm up. She looked at it for a long moment and then slid her own hand into it. At 4, Harp knocked on the porch frame and gestured Wyatt inside. He sat Wyatt at the kitchen table under the one hanging bulb and set his own laptop between them. There's one more thing. I've been keeping it back because I was afraid of what she'd do with it. Now I think she has to see it, and I think it has to come from you. Because if I give it to her, she'll spend the rest of her life thinking I waited too long. On the screen was a scan of a letter Whitaker had written Harp in February of 2020, 3 weeks before he died. Harp, if Dalton moves on me, he'll go for Celeste next. The only thing keeping her safe right now is that he thinks she's too young to see him clearly. The day she wakes up to it, he'll make it look like her mistake. Millbrook is the leverage. He's been buying up heavy equipment repair shops up and down the valley for 2 years, quietly, through 3 different shell LLCs, to corner my supply chain. When he owns Millbrook, he owns you. The day he owns you, she's alone. Don't let him own you. Wyatt read it twice, then a third time. He's been planning the Millbrook acquisition for 6 months on paper, Wyatt said. But he's been working this chessboard for 2 years. It isn't about the numbers, it never was. He needs you gone before she ever opens that envelope, and he needs to own the shop where the original is sitting in a safe. That's right. Show her. I'm telling you to show her. At 5, Wyatt knocked on the bedroom door where Celeste was lying awake on top of the covers in her clothes, one arm across her eyes. He sat on the edge of the bed and handed her the printout. She read it once in the lamplight. Her hands did not shake. She folded it in half along its original crease and handed it back to him. He doesn't get to win, she said. At 6, they loaded the truck. The old Ford, not the Mercedes. Harp climbed into the back seat with the pump shotgun across his knees, muzzle down. June stayed at the cabin with Elaine, and with a retired state trooper 3 houses down, who had agreed to sit on the porch with a coffee cup and a rifle across his lap until they came back. They turned out of the drive and onto Route 9D at 6:12. At 6:31, they came around the bend where the rain had fallen a month before. A black Suburban was parked sideways across both lanes. 2 men in dark coats stood at the hood with their hands in their pockets. No weapons drawn. Just there. Wyatt eased off the throttle. From the back seat, Harp said, "Low. Don't stop. Cut left. Fire road down through Fishkill Creek. I've fished that cut 30 years. Wyatt cut the wheel hard. The Ford bounced off the shoulder and onto an unpaved service road that snaked through the state forest. The Suburban tried to follow and lost traction on the second switchback. Wyatt saw its headlights stutter and slide backward in the rear view. It cost them 20 minutes on the dirt. Krebs had been ready. Where the fire road rejoined Route 9 at the bottom of the grade, a second Suburban was waiting, engine running, parked on the wrong side of the white line. Wyatt glanced at Celeste. "How much battery?" 60%. Call Okafor first. Tell him you're being stopped on a public road with criminal evidence in the truck. Then 911. Give them live GPS coordinates and keep the line open. She dialed. Okafor answered in 2 rings. He listened for 10 seconds and hung up. 90 seconds later, he called her back from a different number. He had already contacted the FBI field office in Newburgh, 11 miles south. State police had been dispatched from Fishkill Barracks. Stay on the line. Keep driving until you see flashing lights. The second Suburban rolled into the lane ahead of them, matching their speed at 25. Wyatt didn't stop. He eased the Ford up alongside it at 30 miles per hour, and at the last second swung the wheel hard into its rear quarter panel. The F-250 was a 3/4-ton truck on a steel frame. The Suburban was not. It lost its line and slid into the drainage ditch with one wheel spinning slowly above the mud. 3 minutes later, 2 state police cruisers came over the hill. They weren't there for the Ford. They blocked the Suburban in the ditch and ordered the 2 men out. 7 minutes after that, 2 unmarked FBI sedans came in from the direction of Newburgh. At 8:14, Celeste walked into James Okafor's office in Albany and set the leather briefcase on his desk. Inside were the medication log, the 14-minute recording, the hospital review, Whitaker's letter to Harp, and a live police report being filed in real time on the road they had just left behind. Okafor listened without interrupting for 40 minutes. When she finished, he stood, walked to his office door, opened it, and asked his deputy to get the Teterboro Tower on the line. At 11 that morning, agents boarded a private jet on the tarmac at Teterboro Airport. Dalton Krebs was in the cabin. He had been trying to reach the Cayman Islands on a flight plan filed under a false passenger manifest. They walked him off the aircraft in handcuffs. The charges, filed that afternoon, ran to 14 counts: federal wire fraud, attempted witness tampering, obstruction of justice, And, after the medication log was authenticated the following week by a forensic pharmacologist at Columbia, criminal negligent homicide in the death of Whitaker Orrick. Celeste spent Sunday night in Manhattan and all of Monday in emergency session with the Orrick Board of Directors in the glass conference room on the 47th floor. The stock dropped 9% at the open on Monday after the arrest hit the wire services. By Tuesday afternoon, it had recovered 4. She spoke on a live call with institutional investors at 2 in the afternoon and answered every question for 90 minutes without once passing a question to counsel, not even the ones about her personal schedule for the previous week. She canceled a scheduled trip to Zurich. She did not come back to Beacon until Tuesday evening. She drove the old Ford up the Taconic. Wyatt had pressed the keys into her hand before she left for the city on Sunday night. She hadn't asked why. She had known. The suspension creaked on the on-ramp at Peekskill, and she smiled at it for the first time in 2 days. At 6:20 on Tuesday, she pulled into the gravel lot at Millbrook. Wyatt was pulling down the bay door. She got out in the same gray suit she had worn to the board meeting, heels gray with city grit, a garment bag folded across her arm, and she walked across the lot and stopped in front of him. "I asked counsel if I could move part of our operations to the Hudson Valley," she said. "The answer is yes. There's a real business case. Our largest logistics hub is already in Newburgh. The rest of the East Coast operations team can work out of Cold Spring or Poughkeepsie with better access to Stewart Airport than they have out of Midtown. I'd be in Manhattan 3 days a week and in Cold Spring 4. If you want me to do that, say one word." He set the wrench down on the fender. He wiped his hands on the rag in his back pocket and took a long breath. "You sure you're picking this because you want to and not because you feel like you owe me?" "I owe you more than you know," she said. "But that's not why. I haven't been able to breathe in 6 years. I've been up here 3 weeks, and I can breathe. I go back to Manhattan for a day and I can't. That's the reason." "You are part of the reason. You are not all of the reason." He nodded once, slow, then stay. They walked to the house together under a sky going lavender. June was on the porch step with a drawing pad on her lap and a box of colored pencils open beside her. When she saw Celeste get out of her father's truck, she stood up and held out a piece of construction paper with both hands. "I drew it a few days ago. I was waiting for you to come get it." 3 stick figures stood beside a blue pickup truck on the page. A tall man, a smaller one, a woman with yellow hair. The 3 figures held hands in a row. Celeste knelt down to June's eye level on the bottom porch step and took the drawing with both hands. She did not cry. She hugged the girl the way she would have hugged a wild bird. Not tight enough, and June hugged back harder than she got. That night, Celeste slept on the couch. They did not talk about what came next. They put an old film on the television. It's a Wonderful Life, which had been Emily's favorite, which Wyatt had not watched since her last Christmas in the small living room of this same house. Wyatt had picked it. It was the first time in 4 years he had been the one to put it in the slot on the old DVD player. They fell asleep at opposite ends of the couch with the credits still running and the television bathing the room in blue light. In the morning, June came downstairs at 6:30 in her dinosaur pajamas, saw them there, pulled a spare blanket off the armchair and laid it across both of them, and then padded into the kitchen and poured herself a bowl of cereal for the first time in her life without asking anyone whether she was allowed. 3 weeks after the arrest, Krebs's attorneys attempted a plea deal. They offered 8 years on the fraud charge in exchange for dropping the homicide count. Okafor declined in a 2-sentence letter. The trial date was set for the 2nd week of March. The Orrick Industrial stock climbed 6% above its pre-crisis level on the news that the company had cleaned house and replaced its chief operating officer with an outside hire the board had vetted for a month, a woman from a Minneapolis industrial group with a reputation for transparency and a refusal to fly private. Celeste announced publicly that Orrick Industrial was formally withdrawing from the acquisition of Millbrook Auto Works and the other 11 Hudson Valley repair facilities that had been bundled into the deal. In its place, the company signed a 10-year exclusive supply partnership with each of the 12 independent shops, preserving their ownership and their existing workforces. Hart Pickard stayed the owner of Millbrook. Wyatt stayed the lead mechanic. Nobody in any of the 12 shops was laid off. The contract was worth $47 million to Millbrook alone over its full term and similar sums to the others. Harp's wife Elaine cried the night he told her over dinner. They had been married 40 years and he had never once seen her cry about money. Celeste took a long-term rental in Cold Spring, a converted carriage house 15 minutes from Beacon with a view of the river through a narrow slot in the trees. She did not move into Wyatt's home. They had agreed on it together, not from caution but from care. June had lost one mother. They would not put another woman in her kitchen by Christmas and make her do the math about who belonged where. A letter came to Wyatt from Cornell in November. The mechanical engineering department was inviting him to complete his degree through a returning student program that allowed 2 years of credit from documented industry work based on a recommendation from a faculty member who remembered him from 2011. He asked Celeste if she had made the call. She swore she hadn't. He believed her. Harp had made the call. He had served with that faculty member in a forward unit in '69 and had only asked the man to read the transcript and make up his own mind. June's second-grade teacher sent a writing prompt home in the folder that week. Describe someone new in your life. June wrote 6 sentences in pencil on lined paper, and the teacher had stapled a gold foil star to the top corner. Her name is Celeste. She got lost in the rain and Daddy found her. Now she is not lost anymore and Daddy laughs again. She is not trying to be my mom. She is just here. I hope she stays. Wyatt read it 3 times, standing at the kitchen counter. He folded the paper in quarters and put it in the drawer beside the framed photograph of Emily that he kept in the living room, the one taken on the boardwalk at Cape May the summer before June was born. He spoke to the photograph the way he sometimes still did when June was asleep upstairs. You'd like her, Em. She's not trying to be you. She's just here. And June is laughing in her kitchen again. I thought you should know. On an afternoon in December, Harp came by the house with a brown paper bag and a thermos of coffee for the porch. Inside the bag was a heavy adjustable wrench that had belonged to Wyatt's father, stamped on the handle with the words "Best Mechanic" in fading white paint from some long-ago garage in upstate Pennsylvania. Harp had kept it in his desk drawer since the winter of 2017 when Wyatt had first come to work at Millbrook and had handed it over because the grief for the old man was still too close to the skin for him to open his toolbox to it. You've had long enough, Harp said. Time to hold this. You've earned it a second time over. Wyatt held the wrench a long time. Celeste stood next to him in the doorway with a cup of coffee warming her hands. June hugged Harp's leg from the other side. 4 people in one small room, and none of them had been a ghost in anybody's sentence for months. October, 1 year later. The same stretch of Route 9D. Wyatt was driving the same old Ford because he hadn't seen a reason to get a new one. Celeste was in the passenger seat. June was in the back, asleep against the door with a stuffed rabbit under her chin. They were driving home from Harp's 69th birthday dinner at the cabin. The guardrail had been repaired months ago, but Wyatt still knew the spot. Celeste looked out the window for a long time. I wasn't going to stop for anyone that night, she said. I was going to drive straight to Albany. I stopped because I hit my head, and I saw your headlights and I thought if not now, never. I was going to drive past, he said. The car was on a bad curve. Your taillights were on and you didn't get out. I couldn't drive past a bleeding woman anymore. She took his hand on the wheel. Dalton Krebs was serving a 19-year sentence at the federal facility in Otisville, 40 miles from where they were sitting. Celeste had never been to visit. Harp had gone once, alone, just to stand outside the fence for 10 minutes on a gray April morning a few weeks after sentencing, and on the way back to his truck he had said quietly, "Whit, it's done. You can rest." Wyatt had finished his Cornell degree in the spring. He was a consulting engineer on contract to Oric Industrial, billing by the hour like any other vendor, and 3 days a week he was still under the hoist at Millbrook. He drove the same truck. The wrench with Best Mechanic stamped on the handle sat on his workbench. Celeste had moved into his house in July. June had been the one to ask. "I have 2 bedrooms and I only use one," she had said at dinner one night. Celeste wore a silver ring he'd had made from the steel of a wrench that had finally worn past its last use. It was not an engagement ring. It was just a ring. It was enough. He pulled the Ford onto the shoulder at the place the Mercedes had been. Celeste stepped out. The October air was dry and clear and smelled of cold leaves and asphalt. He walked around the hood and stood next to her. He set his hand on the small of her back. In the cab of the truck June slept on, the stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. 1 year ago, Celeste said, if you hadn't stopped. 1 year ago, he said, if you hadn't let me. They stood a long time on the shoulder of the road that had almost killed both of them and had instead given them back to each other. Nobody owed anybody. Nobody had won. Some rescues aren't loud. Some just happen on a dark road in October because one person stopped bleeding long enough to ask for help, and the other one never learned to drive past.